I never thought that I'd be betrayed by my own family only to be saved by a vengeful spirit. But life can be funny like that. I sat at my desk, staring at my laptop screen, the cursor blinking as I finished the last line of code for my programming project. Done, I whispered, leaning back in my chair with a sigh of relief. College was hard work, but it felt like I was finally doing something for myself, something that mattered. All those late nights and endless cups of coffee were worth it when I saw everything coming together. Across the room, my suitcase sat neatly packed. I was heading home for my sister Laura's wedding, a big, fancy event that had the whole family buzzing. Laura had always been the golden child. You know the type: perfect hair, perfect smile, and a natural ability to make everyone adore her. Growing up, she was the one everyone noticed. Me, I was the quiet one in the corner, nose buried in a book or figuring out puzzles no one else cared about. Not that I was bitter about it. Okay, maybe a little. But I loved my sister, and despite everything, I was happy for her. She was marrying some rich guy named Brad. I'd only met him once. He seemed nice enough, though a bit flashy. It was hard to imagine him fitting in with our small-town middle-class family, but Laura seemed smitten, so I kept my opinions to myself. As I glanced at my phone, I saw a string of texts from Laura. "Can't wait to see you. Bring something cute to wear. Rehearsal dinner tomorrow. Don't be late. Also, don't forget to smile in the pictures this time, LOL." I rolled my eyes but smiled. Typical Laura, always worried about appearances. I texted back a quick, "Got it, see you tomorrow," and put my phone down. Mom and Dad had always been more focused on Laura. I guess it made sense in a way. She was outgoing and loved being in the spotlight, while I was more of a behind-the-scenes kind of person. Still, they'd always been supportive of my education. Dad was so proud when I got into college. He'd told me, "Kate, you're going to do big things one day. I just know it." That stuck with me. Even if I wasn't the star of the family, I felt like I had my own little place where I mattered. And honestly, I loved college. It was my escape, my chance to prove I could stand on my own 2 feet. I zipped up my laptop case and grabbed my suitcase, glancing around my dorm one last time. It was weird how this tiny space had started to feel like home. As I locked the door behind me and headed out, I couldn't shake the nervous feeling in my stomach. Going home always felt complicated. I wondered how it would feel this time, especially with all the wedding chaos. I had no idea then, but that trip home would change everything. My plans, my future, my entire life. It was all about to get turned upside down. Walking through the front door of my childhood home felt strange, like stepping into a time capsule. Everything looked the same: the faded wallpaper, the old family photos on the mantle. But the air felt different, busier, louder. "Kate!" Mom's voice rang out, and before I could drop my bag, she was wrapping me in a quick hug. "You're finally here. The house has been a madhouse with the wedding coming up." "I can tell," I said, glancing at the mountain of wedding favors piled in the living room. It was like Pinterest had exploded in here. "Where's Laura?" I asked, already knowing the answer. Mom didn't need to reply, because right on cue, Laura swept into the room. "There she is," she squealed, throwing her arms around me. Her engagement ring caught the light, practically blinding me. "I was starting to think you'd skip my big day." "Of course not," I said, forcing a smile. Laura pulled back and looked me over, wrinkling her nose. "You look tired. Are you okay? You should have done something with your hair for the pictures tomorrow." There it was, the classic Laura comment disguised as concern. I ignored it and followed her as she dragged me into the kitchen, where wedding schedules and seating charts covered every surface. The next 2 days passed in a blur of last-minute errands and Laura barking orders like a drill sergeant. I helped where I could, folding napkins and assembling centerpieces, all while feeling like a ghost in my own family. On the day of the wedding, I finally saw the venue. It was breathtaking, an outdoor setup with twinkling fairy lights, floral arrangements that looked like they belonged in a magazine, and a 5-tier cake that probably cost more than my entire semester's tuition. "This is... wow," I murmured, staring at the extravagance. "Brad really went all out, huh?" Dad, who'd been adjusting his tie nearby, chuckled nervously. Mom and Laura exchanged a look that made my stomach twist. Actually, Mom said, her voice faltering, Brad didn't pay for this. I frowned. Wait, what? Then who did? Sweetheart, Mom hesitated, glancing at Dad for backup. We did, Dad said, avoiding my eyes. Your mom and I paid for it. I blinked, trying to process what he was saying. But how? This must have cost a fortune. Dad sighed and rubbed the back of his neck. We used your college fund. For a moment, I thought I misheard. My what? Your tuition money, Mom said quietly. We didn't have a choice. We wanted Laura's wedding to be special. And you didn't have a choice? I repeated, my voice rising. You spent my future so Laura could have her special day? Don't be so dramatic, Laura chimed in, rolling her eyes. You can always take out loans. It's not the end of the world. I stared at her, speechless. My hands trembled as anger and betrayal washed over me. You knew? Of course I knew, she said with a shrug. Mom and Dad wanted to make sure Brad's family didn't look down on us. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. All the years of hard work, all the sacrifices, all the dreams I'd pinned on that degree, it was gone. I can't believe this, I said, my voice breaking. You didn't even think to tell me? Don't make a scene, Kate, Dad muttered. A scene? I laughed bitterly. You just stole my future, and you're worried about a scene? Tears blurred my vision as I stumbled away from them, my chest heaving. I needed air. I needed to get out of there before I said something I couldn't take back. Ignoring their calls, I ran out of the venue, the sound of laughter and clinking glasses fading behind me. The rain, which had been threatening all morning, finally started to fall, soaking through my dress as I wandered aimlessly. I didn't know where I was going, but I couldn't stay there. All I could think about was how my own family had betrayed me. I didn't realize where my feet were taking me until I saw the wrought iron gates of the cemetery looming ahead. The rain had turned the dirt paths into muddy streams, but I didn't care. My dress was already soaked through, and my shoes squished uncomfortably with each step. I pushed open the gate, the rusty hinges groaning in protest. The familiar rows of gravestones brought a strange kind of comfort. This was where I always came when life felt unbearable. My grandfather's grave. He had been my rock growing up, the only one who saw me for who I was and believed in me unconditionally. He would sit with me for hours, listening to my plans for the future, encouraging me to dream bigger. I could almost hear his voice now, urging me to stay strong. I found his grave near the old oak tree, the words etched into the stone barely visible through the rain. Beloved father and grandfather, always in our hearts. Kneeling, I ran my fingers over the lettering, tears mixing with the rain on my cheeks. Grandpa, I whispered, my voice trembling. I don't know what to do. They took everything from me. Everything. For a while, I just sat there, letting the rain wash over me, hoping for some kind of sign or answer. But the cemetery was silent except for the patter of rain and the occasional rumble of thunder. As I stood to leave, my gaze caught on something shiny a few rows away. A glimmer of gold peeked out from the edge of a nearby grave. Curious, I stepped closer, wiping my wet hair out of my eyes. It was a necklace. The pendant was ornate, shaped like a teardrop, with intricate designs etched into the metal. A large, blood-red gemstone sat at the center, glinting even in the overcast light. It looked old, ancient even, but it was strangely untouched by the rain. I hesitated, glancing around. There was no one in sight. The grave it rested on was unmarked, no name or date to give any clues. Who would leave something like this out here? I murmured to myself. Against my better judgment, I reached down and picked it up. The moment my fingers closed around the pendant, everything changed. A searing pain shot through my head, blinding and overwhelming. I dropped to my knees, clutching the necklace as images flooded my mind. A woman's face, her wide, terrified eyes staring at me. A shadowy figure loomed over her. The scene shifted violently, and I saw her fall, blood pooling beneath her as the figure walked away. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My vision blurred, the world spinning around me. Then, everything went dark. When I opened my eyes, I was lying in my dorm room. My heart raced as I sat up, my clothes dry, and the familiar smell of my room surrounding me. I blinked, trying to make sense of it. The last thing I remembered was the cemetery. The necklace. The necklace. I looked down at my hand. It was still there, the red gemstone glinting innocently. "What the hell just happened?" I whispered, my voice trembling. And then faintly, I heard it. A woman's voice, soft but clear, echoing in my mind. "Help me!" The room felt too quiet, but at the same time, there was this strange hum in my ears, like the silence wasn't entirely empty. I sat on my bed, staring at the necklace in my hand. It was beautiful, yes, but it also felt wrong, like it didn't belong to me or this world. And then I heard her. "Kate!" a soft voice whispered. I jumped, almost dropping the necklace. "Who's there?" My eyes darted around the room, but it was empty. "Relax," the voice said again, calm and soothing, but eerily clear, like it was coming from inside my own head. Okay, either I was losing my mind, or someone had pulled off the world's best prank. "This is not funny. Who is this?" "I'm Sophia," the voice replied. I froze. Sophia? That name wasn't familiar. How are you talking to me?" There was a pause, almost like she was gathering herself. "You found my necklace, didn't you? That's how we're connected now." "Wait," I said, holding up the pendant. "This thing is talking to me?" "No," she said patiently. "I am. The necklace is just a bridge." Right, because that made total sense. I pinched the bridge of my nose, wondering if I'd hit my head harder than I thought. This has to be some kind of stress-induced hallucination. "It's not," Sophia said, her tone firm. "And I can prove it. But first, I need you to listen to me. Please." Despite every instinct screaming at me to toss the necklace out the window and pretend this never happened, there was something about her voice. It wasn't just the words, it was the way she spoke. Desperate, but also kind. "Okay," I said slowly. "I'm listening." Sophia's voice softened. "Thank you. My name is Sophia Langston. I was the CEO of Langston Enterprises. I built the company from the ground up, pouring everything I had into it. I wanted to create something for my son, James, something he could inherit and grow." The name Langston Enterprises made me sit up straighter. Even I'd heard of them. They were huge, like Fortune 500 huge. "But you're dead," I said quietly. "Yes," she admitted, her voice tightening. "My brother, Edward, killed me. He couldn't stand that I was giving everything to James, so he forged documents to take control of the company. He made my death look like a suicide." The room felt colder suddenly. "Oh my God," I whispered. "James was just a boy when it happened," Sophia continued. "He's still young, but he's smart, capable. He should be running the company, not Edward." I could feel the weight of her words, the injustice of it all. "And you can't move on?" I asked, barely believing I was having this conversation. "No," she said simply. "Not until Edward is exposed and James gets what's rightfully his." I leaned back against the wall, trying to process everything. "Okay, but why me? Why not someone with, I don't know, actual resources?" "You're more resourceful than you think, Kate," Sophia said. "And I know you're at a crossroads right now. Your family betrayed you, took away your dreams. I can help you if you help me." I frowned. "Help me how?" "Money," she said, her tone frank. "I know James would gladly fund your education once he learns the truth. But more than that, I can guide you, help you navigate this. Together we can bring Edward to justice and change both our lives." It was tempting, so tempting, but it also sounded insane. "And if I say no?" "Then I'll leave you alone," Sophia said quietly. "I don't want to force you into anything, but Kate, I chose you for a reason. You're stronger than you realize. You've been through so much, and yet you're still standing." I stared at the necklace, turning it over in my hand. If what she was saying was true, this could change everything. But if it wasn't, I'd be putting my already fragile sanity on the line. "Fine," I said, letting out a shaky breath. "I'll do it. But if this turns out to be some weird fever dream, I'm blaming you." Sophia chuckled softly. Fair enough. Thank you, Kate. You won't regret this. For the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel completely alone. Sophia had been talking nonstop in my head all morning. Not that I minded. Her guidance was the only thing keeping me from chickening out. Relax, she said as I stood outside the sleek office building. James is a good man, but you'll need to earn his trust. He's been through a lot, and he's cautious. Great, I muttered under my breath, straightening my blazer. No pressure. Just be honest, Sophia encouraged. And remember, I'll be here to help you. Taking a deep breath, I pushed open the heavy glass doors and stepped into the lobby. Everything about the place screamed power and wealth, from the marble floors to the shimmering chandelier overhead. This was Langston Enterprises, the empire Sophia built, now under Edward's control. The receptionist, a sharp-looking woman in her late 20s, glanced up at me. Can I help you? I'm here to see James Langston, I said, hoping I sounded more confident than I felt. She frowned. Do you have an appointment? No, but tell her you're here about his mother, Sophia whispered in my mind. I'm here about his mother, I said quickly, earning a surprised look from the receptionist. She hesitated for a moment before picking up the phone. One moment. My heart pounded as she made the call. After what felt like an eternity, she hung up and gestured toward the elevators. Mr. Langston will see you. As I rode the elevator up to the top floor, Sophia spoke again. Stay calm. James is intelligent and kind, but he's wary of strangers. You'll need to be patient. The elevator doors slid open, revealing a spacious office with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking view of the city. James stood near the desk, flipping through a file. He looked, well, impressive. Tall, sharp features, dark hair that looked like he'd been running his hands through it all day. But his eyes were what caught me. They were piercing, like he could see straight through me. He looked up as I entered, his eyes narrowing slightly. Who are you? I'm Kate, I said, stepping forward. I know this is going to sound strange, but I was a friend of your mother's. He raised an eyebrow. My mother's been gone for years. I know, I said quickly. But she asked me to help you. His frown deepened. Help me? With what? Sophia, a little help here? I thought. Tell him about the company and his uncle, Sophia instructed. I took a deep breath. With Langston Enterprises, I know your uncle took it from you and your mother. I want to help you get it back. James's eyes narrowed further. How do you know about that? Your mother told me, I said, choosing my words carefully. She wanted me to help you carry out her wishes. James studied me, his jaw tightening. And why should I believe you? I hesitated, then decided to take a gamble. She told me about the villa in Florence, the one where you spent your summers as a kid. She said you loved picking lemons from the tree in the courtyard. James froze, his expression softening for the first time. How do you know that? She told me, I said simply, hoping I sounded convincing. He studied me for a long moment, then sighed and gestured to the chair in front of his desk. Fine, talk. I sat down, trying not to fidget. Your uncle forged documents to take control of the company. He made it look like your mother wanted him to run things, but that's not true. She wanted you to inherit everything. James leaned back in his chair, his jaw tightening. I know all that, but I don't have the resources to fight him. He has too much power. That's why I'm here, I said, meeting his gaze. I have a plan, but I can't do it without you. Sophia chimed in with a teasing tone. He's handsome, isn't he? Not the time, Sophia, I thought, trying to ignore the heat rising to my cheeks. James sighed again, rubbing a hand over his face. I don't know if I can trust you, but you know things only my mother would have known. So, I'll give you the benefit of the doubt, for now. Thank you, I said, relieved. I promise, I'm on your side. I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. As I explained everything Sophia had told me, James listened intently, his expression a mix of curiosity and disbelief. By the time I finished, he leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. You're either the best liar I've ever met, or you're telling the truth. I guess I'll find out soon enough. Thank you for trusting me, I said, genuinely relieved. I wouldn't go that far, he said, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. But I'll give you a chance to prove yourself. As I left the office, I could feel Sophia's satisfaction radiating in my head. See? Told you he'd come around. And I think he likes you, she said, her tone teasing. Really not the time, Sophia, I muttered under my breath, though I couldn't stop the small smile forming on my face. For the first time in days, I felt like things might actually work out. When Sophia said we needed evidence, I wasn't expecting her to mean digging through dusty boxes and secret hiding spots. Yet here we were, James and I sitting in the middle of his late mother's private study, surrounded by piles of old papers, photo albums, and what seemed like a lifetime of memories. This feels like finding a needle in a haystack, I muttered, brushing dust off my hands. The room smelled faintly of lavender, probably from whatever perfume Sophia used to wear. It was strange how, even though I'd never met her in life, I felt like I knew her better than anyone. Look for a blue folder. Sophia's voice chimed in my head. I kept all my important documents there. Blue folder, I repeated out loud, earning a curious glance from James. What? He asked. Nothing, just, your mother mentioned keeping important documents in a blue folder, I said, quickly covering. James raised an eyebrow, but didn't question it. Instead, he started pulling drawers open, rifling through their contents. I focused on the bookshelves, running my fingers along the spines, hoping for some hidden compartment or clue. After what felt like forever, James let out a triumphant, "Got it!" and held up a worn blue folder. My heart raced as he carefully opened it. Inside were several legal papers, including her will, James whispered, staring at the document like it was a ghost. I leaned over to look. There it was, plain as day. Sophia Langston's final testament, leaving her entire estate and company shares to James. This changes everything, I said, excitement bubbling up. James nodded but didn't smile. If it's valid, he said, Edward could have forged something to override this. He's sneaky, like that. Sophia's voice piped up in my head again. There's more, Kate. You need to find the camera. I froze. The camera, I murmured. What camera? James asked. I hesitated, then decided to come clean. Your mother told me there's a hidden security camera in her house. It might have recorded everything. James didn't even blink. Where? She said it's in the study, somewhere near the fireplace, I said, glancing toward the ornate mantel. Without hesitation, James started inspecting the area. He tapped along the edges of the mantelpiece, looking for anything unusual. Meanwhile, I crouched and ran my fingers along the bottom of the wooden panels. Found it, James suddenly said. He pointed to a tiny lens embedded so seamlessly into the wood that it was practically invisible. How do we get the footage? I asked. James tugged at a small compartment hidden in the wall. Inside was a slim recording device. Looks like it saved everything here, he said. We both held our breath as James connected the device to his laptop. A grainy video began to play, showing Sophia in her study, pacing back and forth. Then Edward appeared. My stomach dropped. The video showed them arguing. Edward was shouting, gesturing wildly, while Sophia tried to calm him down. Then, without warning, Edward lunged at her. I covered my mouth as the rest unfolded. Edward grabbed something, a heavy paperweight, and struck her. He then staged the scene to look like a suicide, adjusting the position of her body before leaving the room. James stared at the screen, his jaw tight. He killed her, he said, his voice shaking. We have proof now, I said softly. Sophia's voice broke through the tension in my head. You did it, Kate. You found the truth. Tears welled up in my eyes, not just for Sophia, but for James too. We'll make this right, I promised, both to him and to her. James nodded, his expression determined. It's time to take everything back. James and I were huddled in his spacious living room, surrounded by papers, documents, and James's laptop glowing faintly in the dim light. It felt surreal, like we were planning some high-stakes heist, except instead of stealing, we were trying to reclaim everything Edward had taken. Pass me that pen, James said, his focus locked on the legal brief in front of him. I handed it to him, my hand brushing his for a brief moment. A jolt ran through me. But I quickly shook it off. This wasn't the time for distractions. Sophia's voice chimed in my head as if she sensed my hesitation. You're doing fine, Kate. Keep going. I let out a breath and grabbed the next document in the pile. Okay, so we have the will, the camera footage, and the financial records showing Edward's creative accounting. What's next? James leaned back, running a hand through his hair. We need to ensure this doesn't just bury Edward legally, but also destroys his reputation. He's been manipulating the board for years, convincing them I'm some naive kid who can't handle the company. Then we hit him where it hurts, his credibility, I said, feeling more confident with every step we took. James smirked, a spark of admiration in his eyes. You're good at this. Thanks, I said, my cheeks warming. The more time I spent with James, the clearer it became that we worked well together, not just as partners in this mission, but as people. He wasn't the aloof, guarded man I'd met on the first day. Underneath the grief and the drive for justice, there was someone warm, kind, and fiercely loyal to his mother's legacy. You don't have to stay up this late, you know, James said, breaking me out of my thoughts. Neither do you, I countered, raising an eyebrow. He chuckled softly, and the sound sent a flutter through my chest. Sophia's voice echoed in my mind again, teasing this time. I like him for you, Kate. Don't mess this up. I rolled my eyes, though I couldn't help but smile. All right, I said, setting down a stack of documents. If we're going to take Edward down, we need a game plan. What's our next move? Over the next few days, we worked tirelessly. James brought in a legal team, a group of sharp-eyed professionals who knew how to dissect every piece of evidence we had. The footage from the hidden camera was our smoking gun, but the legal team advised us to compile additional supporting evidence to make our case airtight. That meant digging into company records, tracking down old emails, and interviewing anyone who might have seen or heard something suspicious. One night, after hours of poring over files, James leaned back and sighed. You know, this isn't just about the company or the money. It's about my mom. She didn't deserve what happened to her. I placed a hand on his arm, looking him in the eye. We're going to make this right. For her and for you. He nodded, his gaze lingering on mine. I'm glad you're here, Kate. I couldn't have done this without you. My heart skipped a beat, but I quickly focused back on the papers in front of me. Well, you're stuck with me now, I said lightly, though the words carried more meaning than I intended. Finally, after what felt like weeks compressed into a handful of intense days, we had everything we needed. The will, the footage, the financial discrepancies, it was all packaged into a compelling case. James's legal team prepared a presentation for the company's board of directors, scheduled for the following week. At the same time, we filed the evidence with the authorities, ensuring Edward would face legal consequences. We're ready, James said one evening, his voice steady but laced with determination. Yeah, I agreed, though a part of me couldn't believe how far we'd come. Sophia's voice whispered one last time before fading for the night. You've done well, Kate. I'm proud of you both. Her words felt like a blessing, and for the first time since this whirlwind journey began, I allowed myself to believe that we could win. The conference room at the company's headquarters was suffocatingly tense. Edward sat at the head of the table, his smug confidence practically radiating off him. His tailored suit and gold watch screamed power, but today, James and I were ready to strip him of all of it. James leaned toward me and whispered, Are you ready? I nodded, gripping the folder of evidence tightly in my lap. Let's do this. Edward's piercing gaze locked onto us as we entered. Well, if it isn't my dear nephew and his friend, to what do I owe the pleasure? His words dripped with condescension. James didn't waste time. We know what you did, Edward. The lies, the fraud, and most importantly, what you did to my mother. Edward leaned back in his chair, feigning surprise. I have no idea what you're talking about, James. But I must say, this little crusade of yours is adorable. My blood boiled, but I kept my voice steady. It won't be so adorable when the authorities see the evidence we have. I slid the folder across the table, watching as Edward's confident smirk faltered. He hesitated before opening it, and for a brief moment I caught a flicker of panic in his eyes. Inside was everything. Copies of Sophia's will, financial records showing Edward's embezzlement, and, most damning of all, stills from the security footage capturing Sophia's murder. Edward closed the folder with a snap, his face twisting into a sneer. "You think this will hold up? This is all circumstantial." James stepped forward, his voice cold and firm. "It's over, Edward. The will proves you had no legal right to the company. The footage shows exactly what you did to my mother. And the financial records? They're enough to put you behind bars for the rest of your life." Edward's bravado cracked. He leaned forward, his tone shifting from dismissive to desperate. "James, think about this. I can make this worth your while. You're my nephew, after all. You don't have to do this." "Don't you dare try to bribe me," James said, his voice low and seething. Edward turned to me, his expression hardening. "And you, what's your price? A new car? A house? Whatever it is, I can get it for you. Just walk away." I stepped closer, meeting his gaze without flinching. "You can't buy me, Edward, and you can't buy your way out of this." He slammed his fist on the table, his composure unraveling. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. I've built this company from the ground up. I've destroyed people for less than this." James didn't back down. "And now you're going to face the consequences." As if on cue, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed in the hallway. Moments later, 2 uniformed officers entered the room. Edward's eyes widened, and he shot to his feet. "You called the cops?" "We did," James said calmly. One officer stepped forward. "Edward Harris, you're under arrest for the murder of Sophia Harris, as well as charges of fraud and embezzlement." Edward backed away, his hands raised. "This is a mistake. You can't do this." The officers didn't hesitate. They cuffed him as he shouted protests, his earlier confidence now completely shattered. James and I watched in silence as they led him out of the room. It wasn't until the door closed behind them that James let out a shaky breath. "It's over," he said, his voice a mix of relief and exhaustion. I placed a hand on his arm, offering a small smile. "She'd be proud of you, James." He looked at me, his eyes softening. "She'd be proud of us." For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a sense of closure. Sophia's voice, always present in my mind, was silent now. I knew she was finally at peace. And for James and me, this was just the beginning of a new chapter. It was late that night when I finally felt the shift. James and I sat in his living room, the faint glow of the fireplace casting shadows on the walls. The air was calm, almost too calm, as if the world itself had paused to exhale after the chaos of the past few weeks. James had fallen asleep on the couch, his head resting against the armrest, his breathing steady and soft. I stayed awake, staring at the necklace Sophia had left behind, its ornate design glinting in the dim light. And then I heard her voice. "Kate?" she said softly, almost like a whisper. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. "Sophia?" "Yes, it's me," she replied. There was a warmth in her tone now, a gentleness that hadn't been there before. I felt a lump rise in my throat. "Is it over? Are you okay now?" There was a brief pause before she spoke again. "Thanks to you, yes. You were braver than I ever could have imagined, Kate. You didn't just save my son's future. You saved me." I blinked back tears, unsure of what to say. "I didn't do it alone. You guided me every step of the way." She chuckled, the sound soft and melodic. "Maybe, but you didn't have to listen. You could have walked away at any moment. Instead, you stayed, even when it was hard." I glanced at James, still sound asleep, his face peaceful. "He deserved the truth," I said quietly, "and you deserve justice." Sophia's voice seemed to smile. "And now you've found something beautiful for yourself, too. I can see the way you look at him, Kate, and the way he looks at you. I'm glad my son has someone like you in his life." I felt my cheeks warm. "We're still figuring things out," I murmured, "but I think he's the real deal." "I know he is," she said with certainty. The room grew quieter, the fire crackling softly. I could feel her presence beginning to fade, like a shadow retreating at dawn. "Are you leaving?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "It's time," she replied. "You've done everything I could have ever hoped for. My son is safe, the truth is out, and I can finally rest. A single tear rolled down my cheek. I'll miss you, Sophia. And I'll always be grateful for you, Kate, she said. Live your life fully, without fear. You've earned every bit of happiness that comes your way. With that, the room grew still. The necklace in my hand felt warm for a brief moment, then cool again. I knew she was gone. For the first time since this journey began, my mind was silent. No guiding voice, no urgent whispers, just peace. I looked at James, then at the life waiting for us ahead. Thank you, Sophia, I whispered. And as the fire flickered softly, I felt ready to embrace the future. James and I were sitting on the patio of his estate one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The colors of the sky, brilliant streaks of orange and pink, felt like a reflection of the warmth I'd come to feel in his presence. It had been months since Edward's arrest, and life had finally started to settle into something close to normal. You're quiet tonight, James said, nudging my arm with his. His blue eyes sparkled with curiosity. I smiled faintly, just thinking about how much has changed. James tilted his head, his expression soft. Changed for the better, I hope. I nodded. Definitely for the better, but there's something I haven't told you. He shifted his chair to face me fully, giving me his undivided attention. I'm listening? I took a deep breath. It was time to share the part of my life I'd kept tucked away. Before all of this, my family, well, they weren't great. My parents used the money they'd saved for my college tuition to pay for my sister's wedding. They didn't even tell me until the day of the wedding. I left that night completely heartbroken. I've been trying to figure out what my life looks like ever since. James didn't interrupt, but I could see the anger flashing in his eyes. They threw away your future for a party? He asked, his voice laced with disbelief. I nodded, my throat tightening. Pretty much. It felt like I didn't matter to them at all. He reached across the table and took my hand. You matter, Kate, more than you'll ever know. My chest ached at the sincerity in his voice. I've come a long way since then, I said, squeezing his hand, but I'd be lying if I said it didn't still hurt. James leaned closer, his grip on my hand firm. You sacrificed so much to help my mom, and you've been nothing but incredible through everything. Let me help you now. I blinked at him. What do you mean? I'm going to pay for your college tuition, he said firmly. It's the least I can do. You shouldn't have to give up your dreams because of them. Tears welled in my eyes, and I shook my head. James, you don't have to. I want to, he interrupted, his voice steady. I can't change what they did to you, but I can make sure you never have to feel powerless like that again. A tear slipped down my cheek, and I smiled through it. Thank you, James. He pulled me into his arms, holding me close. You deserve the world, Kate. And I'm going to make sure you have it. A few months later, James and I were on the same patio, but this time there was a different kind of anticipation in the air. As the sun set, he knelt before me, holding a small velvet box. Kate, he said, his voice filled with emotion. You've changed my life in ways I never thought possible. Will you marry me? Through tears of joy, I whispered, yes. In that moment, I knew I'd found not just love, but someone who truly saw me. The drive to my childhood home felt surreal. James sat beside me, his hand resting reassuringly on mine. You sure you want to do this? He asked, his tone gentle. I need to, I said, staring at the familiar streets passing by. I've spent too much time letting their betrayal haunt me. It's time to face them and move on, for good. As we pulled into the driveway, memories of my old life flooded back. The house looked the same, but it felt so much smaller now, so insignificant compared to everything I'd experienced since I left. James squeezed my hand one last time before we stepped out of the car. The door opened before I could knock. My mother stood there, her eyes wide as they darted between me and James. Kate, she exclaimed, her voice a mix of surprise and forced warmth. We weren't expecting you. Clearly, I said, stepping past her into the house. James followed, his presence towering and unshakable. My father appeared in the living room, his expression a mirror of my mother's. Equal parts awe and discomfort. Kate, it's been so long, he said awkwardly. And this must be James? Yes, I said simply. My husband. Their eyes nearly popped out of their sockets. My mother recovered first, her tone turning syrupy. Oh, Kate, we've heard so much about him. Congratulations, sweetheart. We always knew you'd do something amazing with your life. I couldn't help but laugh, the sound bitter in my ears. Really? Because the last time we spoke, you told me my education didn't matter compared to Laura's wedding. The room fell silent, the weight of my words pressing down on all of us. My mother shifted uncomfortably. Kate, we did what we thought was best for the family. Laura needed a wedding, and I needed a future. I cut her off. But you decided that her one day was more important than my entire life. My father cleared his throat. We made a mistake, Kate, but look at you now. You've done so well for yourself. Can't we put the past behind us? James, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke. She's done well because she's strong and resourceful, not because of anything you did. In fact, she succeeded in spite of you. I glanced at James, gratitude swelling in my chest. Turning back to my parents, I said, "He's right. You didn't believe in me. You didn't support me, and when I needed you the most, you abandoned me." My mother's voice cracked. "We're sorry, Kate. Truly. Please forgive us. Let's be a family again." I shook my head, the words cutting deeper than I expected. "No, I can't. You've shown me who you are, selfish and greedy. You only care now because you think you can benefit from what I've built. But I don't owe you anything." My father stepped forward. "Kate, don't be like this. Family is everything." I let out a bitter laugh. "Funny. That's not what you said when you threw me away for Laura's wedding. Family only mattered when it suited you?" The silence was deafening. My parents' faces fell, the reality of my words finally sinking in. I turned toward the door, James by my side. "I've moved on and I'm happy, but you won't be a part of that happiness. Goodbye." As we walked out, my mother's voice trembled behind me. "Kate, wait." I didn't look back. Outside, I took a deep breath of the cool air. The weight I'd carried for years lifted with every step I took away from that house. James wrapped an arm around me. "How do you feel?" "Free," I said, a smile breaking through. "For the first time in a long time, I feel free." We walked to the car, leaving behind the past for good.